What's up, fellas? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the NBA's Eastern Conference. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials up there as well. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, a few general points here, and then we're going to go through a couple of tiers that I have for the teams within the East, where I have each one of them ranked. And the first point is this is an absolutely brutal conference. The years of the East not having top tier contenders or not being a very deep conference are over. And you could argue that this is one of the strongest seasons for what has typically been the weaker conference in the NBA ever. Let me go ahead and read you some teams, and then I'll give you a fact. We have the Nets, Bucks, Sixers, Hawks, Heat, Celtics, Pacers, Bulls, Knicks, Hornets, Raptors, and Wizards. Okay? 2 of those teams will not make the play-in game, and 4 of those teams will not make the postseason as a whole. That is an incredibly deep list of teams, even teams at the bottom that you're thinking, oh, why are the Hornets in there? The Hornets were a playoff team last year before they suffered some significant injuries. The Raptors are one of the better organizations in the entire league. This conference is incredibly difficult, and we're going to go through every single team on the list. I have them split up into 4 different tiers, essentially, in terms of how much of a threat I think they are to compete, just where I have them in the conference. We're going to begin by talking about what I think is the best team in the entire conference. They're not necessarily ranked within these tiers, but in this case they are, and it's the Brooklyn Nets. This is a team that had the best offensive rating in the league last year, despite only having an average games played from Kyrie, KD, and James Harden combined of a little bit over 41. So not a ton of availability for Brooklyn, but plenty of ability. They did some things in the offseason to kind of shift around the roster. I love the addition of Patty Mills. They're looking at exploring a buyout for DeAndre Jordan. They've got some rookies that could look to contribute. They lost someone like Jeff Green, but ultimately it's going to come down to the 3 guys at the top. Are they healthy? Are they going to be ready to go for the entire postseason? And I think we're all kind of on the same page about Brooklyn, and that is that if you were able to simulate the season with every single team fully healthy, no injuries at all, they have to be one of the contenders, one of the favorites to win the title this year. However, they also are probably the team at the top of all of this when it comes to these contenders that has the most to lose from an injury standpoint and are most likely to have issues with injuries, with all the 3 players that we discussed being over 30 years old, each of them having injury issues, and of course what happened in the postseason last year. And that's what it comes down to, is if these guys are healthy, they're going to be very good. But with the way the talent at the top of the NBA has kind of shifted and how good each of the top 4 and 5 teams are, I don't think it's a situation where they can lose James Harden, Kevin Durant, or Kyrie Irving, any one of those guys, and still, have a really, really favorable shot to win the title. At least that's where I'm at right now. I think they need all 3 guys, and we'll see if they end up having all 3 of them. But I think that's kind of the obvious point, right? The next team in this tier for me is Milwaukee, and I think the biggest thing, it doesn't have anything to do with the roster, who they added, who they're bringing back. Yes, they've got DiVincenzo back. They brought in Grayson Allen. They just have to prove that it wasn't a fluke, because I'm not taking anything away from Milwaukee here. It was a great run. Giannis was amazing for the majority of the playoffs, but especially the second half of them, and in the finals especially, he was incredible. And they did really well, to win the finals, and congrats to them. But what it comes down to is that Brooklyn team took them to 7 games, and if Kevin Durant's toe isn't on the line, they end up losing that series to Brooklyn in 7 games. Despite the injury issues that the Nets were dealing with. And then you can talk about, maybe the Suns weren't the best team ever that they ended up facing in the finals. They faced the Hawks in the conference finals. I'm not discrediting the title at all for Milwaukee. That's just the narrative that's going to be around this team, and one that they're going to have to deal with. But that's the top tier. I think it's pretty safe to say that if you want to just pick 2 teams at the top of the Eastern Conference, it's going to be those 2 teams. Then we get into what I believe is the second tier. We begin, again, these are not in order, it's just the order that I have them in to kind of discuss, with Philadelphia. Because, by the way, the Sixers had the best record in the East last year. They had the 3rd best record in the league. They're one of the best defensive teams in the entire league. But they obviously struggled in the postseason, especially Ben Simmons. They're trying to figure out what to do with him. Embiid's health has been a positive lately, but you can never discount the possibility of him having injury issues. And I think for Philly, it's going to be, assuming they figure out the Simmons thing, it's going to be a lot of the same. They're going to be good in the regular season. Their size and their length is going to mean that they're going to be a very good defensive team. But unless they have a true top-level backcourt player that they get in exchange for Ben Simmons, it's going to be difficult for them to produce at a high level in the postseason. And that's pretty much all it comes down to. Then you've got the Atlanta Hawks. And I put down that there's no reason from a talent perspective that this can't be a top 3 team in the East next year. It just depends on if they're going to want it as bad, if they're going to kind of rest on what they did last year with the run they went on after they hired Nate McMillan. From a talent perspective, from a depth perspective, they've got everything they could need. They've got some pieces they can trade as well. And Atlanta is going to be a very good team this year, assuming that they can figure some things out defensively, grow a little bit on that end of the floor, and offensively, we saw how potent they can be. As long as they're healthy, they're going to absolutely be a threat in the East this year. Next up, Miami, a team I want to spend a little bit more time on here because I think that there's this mystique around the Heat in general where people kind of expect them to overachieve and they expect them to always be a threat in the postseason. And a lot of that comes from just the organization as a whole, Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, and then, of course, the run that they went on in the bubble. A team that was a 5 seed, they upset a lot of teams. They get to the finals, they lose in 6 games. And I think a lot of that is carrying over for this Heat team specifically. However, I'm not incredibly optimistic about them being like a real big threat. I think they're certainly going to challenge to be a top 5, top 6 team, but I don't view them in the Nets, Bucks, even Sixers, potentially Hawks like category necessarily. I think they could be, but I have concerns about their age and their health. It's awesome they brought in Kyle Lowry. They arguably had one of the best off seasons in the league, but just the guys that they're going to be counting on make me nervous from a availability standpoint and potentially a productivity standpoint when it comes to the age of someone like Kyle Lowry. Love Bam. They've got a move to make with the Tyler Hero thing. They brought in some guys on the wing that are going to be able to help them. I'm just a little bit nervous about their longevity throughout the season, and I think potentially they're being a little bit overrated. Then I've got the Boston Celtics. And that is the end of this tier, by the way, for those of you that are looking for another team. Let's talk about the Celtics briefly because I just made a video on them, and then I'll explain why I have who I have in the next tier. So basically it comes down to, can Brown and Tatum be special? Can they be one of the best duos in the league from a two-way perspective? If they can be, there's no reason they can't be a top 6 team. There's no reason that they cannot be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference and potentially make the conference finals. I made that entire video the other day. If you want more stuff on the Celtics, you can go check that out. Next, I have a very large tier, but what I believe is the third tier and the last of that 10 list of teams, that 10-team list that I gave you guys earlier in terms of the teams that could make the postseason. The Pacers. I put them here, but I think that they can easily be a top 6 team. When you look at what they went through last year between protocol stuff, injury stuff, and a coach that turned out to be an absolute disaster, going from that to Rick Carlisle, who I believe to be one of the better coaches in the league, and hopefully having better injury luck, having someone like Karis LeVert, Malcolm Brogdon, Domantas Sabonis, Miles Turner, TJ Warren, they've got a ton of depth, a ton of options. That, to me, speaks to a team that's going to be a very good regular season team, and from a record standpoint, could certainly be in the top 6. But the fact that this Indiana team, with the depth that they do have, having a better coach, is at what appears to be number 7 in this conference, speaks to the depth of this conference for this upcoming season. Next up, Chicago. Yes, maybe it's a little bit surprising that they are not in that category with Boston, Miami, guys like that. I just have major questions defensively. I don't know how it's all going to fit. And the more I look at it, I just like those other 6 teams better than I like Chicago. I wouldn't be surprised if they're a top 6 team. Certainly offensively, they're going to have the ability to, but they're just relying on a lot of guys that are relatively new to the system. They're relying on a lot of guys that I don't really know how they fit and aren't going to be very good defensively. And that's what it comes down to. And in the regular season, one of the better ways that you can be a good regular season team from a record standpoint is just to be an average defensive team and to give effort. And I'm not convinced that that's going to be something that Chicago is going to be able to put forth next year on the defensive end of the floor. And as a result, I don't know that they're going to be a top 6 team next year, as is the case with every single team in this tier. Next up, a team that I think is definitely being overrated a bit, and it's the New York Knicks. I understand the momentum behind this team, and they got better. They certainly got better offensively. They added pieces, Kemba, Fournier. I just have some questions and some concerns about their defense. And I know it's odd to question that because it's Thibodeau, and they're going to put in a ton of effort and energy, and they should be a good regular season team. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them at the 7th or the 8th spot. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think if you're looking for a team to regress back to what they should be from a standing standpoint, I think the Knicks should be at the top of that list because if they slip at all defensively from the numbers they put up last year, they're not going to be a top 5, top 6 team in the East, and think about how close things were towards the end of the year last year to get them to the seat that they got. I see them more as a 7 or 8 team than I do as a 5 or 6 team, quite frankly, just because I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up the same level of defensive prowess that they had throughout the entirety of the season. I hope I'm wrong, quite frankly. Next up, the Hornets. I think people are a little surprised to see them in a tier that could possibly put them in the postseason. But keep in mind, before they suffered injuries to Hayward and Lonzo last year, this was a playoff team. This was a very solid playoff team last year. I think they got better in certain areas. They certainly have better depth. I like their coach. I would not be surprised at all to see the Hornets be a top 8 team this year. I think that they're maybe not the flashiest team because apart from LaMelo, did I call him Lonzo earlier? I might have called him Lonzo earlier. I apologize. Apart from LaMelo, maybe there's not a ton of flashy names here, but they've got a lot of really good NBA players, a good coach. Wouldn't be surprised to see them in the top 8. The Raptors, again, they're one of the better organizations in the league, and importantly, they have a lot of young guys that are going to be looking to prove themselves. And if you look at their core, like, it's really not bad. Siakam should have a better year. Van Fleet, OG, Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, Dragic / whatever they get in a Dragic trade. There's some skill, there's some ability, there's some talent here in Toronto, and I wouldn't put it past a Nick Nurse team to be much better than you would expect them to be in the regular season. And then Washington, I'm not super high on them. I like Dinwiddie, of course. Beal is there. I think they have a surprising amount of depth. I just don't know if they have the top end talent to compete for a playoff spot in what is clearly, as you can tell by this video, a very, very deep Eastern Conference. And then, by the way, the Cavs and the Pistons are going to be better. The Magic are probably going to be a disaster. But from 1 through, what would that be, 13 or 14, all but one team in the conference, that being Orlando, assuming everybody's healthy, is going to be at least decent. Like, there aren't going to be a ton of super easy games throughout the schedule of the Eastern Conference. And again, I think when you look at it top to bottom, this is potentially as deep as the conference has been maybe ever from a talent standpoint and from a standpoint of teams that actually have a legitimate real chance to make the postseason. The last point that I will make here is an unfortunate one, and that is that it's likely that protocol stuff and injury stuff is going to play a huge role in this. There's going to be a team in this top 10 that does not place nearly as high as you would think that they would in the postseason standings because of injuries, because of a significant injury to a big name guy, because of potentially protocol stuff, whatever the case may be. And that could potentially be the biggest difference maker between any of those teams in that bottom tier not having the success that I think their fans are hoping for them to have this year. So again, those first 10 teams that I listed, there are Bulls fans that are hoping they're going to be a top 4 team this year. It's possible you're in the play-in game. There are Knicks fans that think that they're going to be a top 4 team, top 5 team again in the conference. It's possible you could be in the play-in game. It is a very deep conference, and it's exciting, but it's also terrifying if you're one of those teams in that third tier where you're wondering, we're good, but we might not be good enough to even get to the playoffs in what has typically been an easy conference to get to the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like right now on it. Check out more videos from me at the box on screen, and as I said, check out my socials. Those are down in the description below. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.